Good afternoon, and welcome to the Canadian Housing and Renewal Association webinar, From A to Z, Evaluation and Communication Strategies for the Nonprofit Sector. I'm Dominika Krzeminska, Director of Programs and Strategic Initiatives at CHRA, and I will be your host for today's webinar. Thank you everyone for joining us. Before we begin, I'd like to give a brief overview of this webinar's technology. I will then introduce our agenda and speakers for this afternoon's presentation. Today's webinar is in real time. You should now be able to see a title screen of today's presentation and be able to hear me via your computer speakers, your headset, or through the telephone if you've chosen to dial in. You're currently all muted, and we do this to minimize background noise. However, if you wish to ask questions, which we encourage you to do so, you may through the question dialog box on the webinar control panel at any time during the presentation. We'll address as many questions as possible at the end of the webinar during the question and answer period. If at any point you're having problems with the technology, Emily Sartoretto here at the CHRA office is available to help. You can send her a message through the chat on the webinar control panel. Just make sure to select her as the recipient. Moving on to today's agenda, CHRA is pleased to have with us John Ecker, Director of Research and Evaluation at the Canadian Observatory on Homelessness, and Steph Vasco, Director of Communications at the Canadian Observatory on Homelessness. In today's webinar, Steph and John will provide an overview of research, evaluation, and communications tools and discuss strategies for individuals and organizations to develop their research, evaluation, and strategic communication skills. Part 1 of the webinar will present on building research and evaluation capacity, followed by Part 2, which will walk participants through developing a communications strategy to share their research and evaluation findings with varied audiences. I now have the pleasure of introducing to you our presenters. Dr. John Ecker is the Director of Research and Evaluation at the Canadian Observatory on Homelessness out of Toronto. Within this role, he provides research and evaluation support to communities across Canada. His research and evaluation interests are many, but he primarily focuses on homelessness, housing first, community integration, and LGBTQ2S studies. Steph Vasco leads the team responsible for designing and disseminating the Canadian Observatory's publications and communications materials through the Homeless Hub website, the world's largest library of homelessness research. Welcome, John and Steph. I would like to turn it over to you now.
Thanks so much for that introduction. John Ecker here. So today Steph and I are coming at you live from the Canadian Observatory on Homelessness offices based out of York University. And we're excited to talk about research evaluation and knowledge mobilization and communications. So we'll get things going. Just the objective of today's session, just reiterating. So today we'll be defining some key research and evaluation concepts, learning some of the basics of research and evaluation practices, developing knowledge mobilization strategies, and thinking of ways to put theory into practice. So I'm obsessed with this meme right here. It's of Mariah Carey. I always like to, this is in reference to her being asked if she knows who Jennifer Lopez is, and her response is, I don't know her. I think it's one of the most classic responses ever, and I think it oftentimes, I feel that too when I go into presentations, like who exactly is speaking to us right now. So myself, I'm the Director of Research and Evaluation at the Canadian Observatory on Homelessness. I did my PhD in psychology at the University of Ottawa, working under the supervision of Dr. Tim Aubry. A little bit about me as well. I like tennis. I'm obsessed with tennis and all things pop culture, hence the Mariah Carey reference. And I will let Steph do a similar introduction when it comes to her part as well. Okay, so Steph and I are part of a new initiative at the Canadian Observatory on Homelessness called Hub Solutions. So this is kind of our sector-driven evaluation and design kind of shop. So we launched in 2016. We provide research, evaluation, and design consultations to those in the field. And the goal of our venture is to enhance research, evaluation, and design capacity in the field. We also provide fee-for-service research, evaluation, and design work for communities and programs that would like enhanced supports. So we have a values-driven kind of approach to evaluation and design. The first being issue expertise. So being at the COH, we have an in-depth knowledge of homelessness. We also really value collaboration and partnership. So we have a vast network of academics, service providers, local leaders, policymakers, and then individuals with lived experience that we work with on all of our projects. A big thing for us too is equity, inclusion, and respect. So we uphold ethical standards and consult with stakeholders to ensure that our research is effective, inclusive, and respectful. And as we're talking about today, capacity building is a large component of our work as well. So we're looking to improve solutions to homelessness by supporting communities to build their own research, evaluation, and design expertise and capacity. And lastly, being knowledge mobilization. Knowledge mobilization is a big component to our work as well. We want to ensure that we are able to get our research, policy, and evaluation activities out there to the field. So this is a big part of our work. So how do we help to communicate complex data and research by using visuals that are clear, simple, and easy to understand? So that's kind of the approach that we take, and we kind of have that two-pronged approach. So we have our research and evaluation shop, as well as our design and knowledge mobilization shop. So the first part of the webinar today will kind of focus on the research and evaluation shop. Once I conclude, Steph will jump on and talk about the design and knowledge mobilization work that we do, and ways and strategies to really that you can take away from today's webinar that you can use in your everyday work. So research and evaluation, I kind of see it as a sea of jargon, and I'm not sure if other people out there feel the same way. There are a bunch of terms that we use to really describe the different types of evaluation that is out there. So there's kind of two overarching kind of categories of evaluation. You'll see on the left is the formative evaluation, and on the right is the summative evaluation. So when you think about formative evaluation, it's kind of looking at the meanings in the name, right? Thinking of how the program is being formed, the process of implementing programs, those kind of evaluations. So we're thinking about terms like developmental evaluation, where you're actually able to go in, work with programs, become embedded within the program, and document that process and provide feedback. And it's really dynamic. It's really used for complex kind of interventions. But before that, you might want to do a needs assessment, right? You want to see what needs are currently out there in your community. Implementation evaluation, process evaluation, evaluability assessment. These are all terms that you'll hear about when you hear the word formative evaluation. And I'll get into these a bit more in depth in the coming slides. And then there's summative evaluations too. I think this is more of the classic kind of evaluation that people are aware of. So what are the outcomes of your program? People really want to know if the program is being effective, right? So thinking in terms of what are the outcomes of the program? What is the impact of the program? What is the impact of the program that extends beyond just the program itself, but also at thinking of like the community level and places like that. When you hear some summative evaluation as well, you may hear things like a cost-benefit evaluation, an economic analysis, and including within this as well is thinking about knowledge mobilization, right? We always hear beware the dusty shelf. We don't want our evaluation products to just sit there and not be used in a meaningful way, because you can really gather a lot of really interesting information for program improvement, policy change that can stem from your evaluation results. So it's really important to think about that throughout the process as well, and Steph will talk about that in greater detail later. So breaking it down, as I already said, there's two types of evaluation. We have the formative and the summative, and within each type of evaluation, there are specific forms of evaluation. So formative evaluation, as I said, there's different kinds of evaluation you may do. So essentially, it's any evaluation that takes place before or during a program's implementation with the aim of improving the project's design and performance. So as you see, I list out 4 here and kind of when these evaluations may happen during your program's development or the implementation of your program. So I threw in literature review as well. Now, this isn't necessarily a type of evaluation, right? This is something that's part of a lot of evaluations. And I think it's important to really emphasize, because no one wants to reinvent the wheel. You want to see what else has been out there And you really want to take key learnings and even key failings from the literature. So you want to see, okay, how have other people been doing something similar? And how can I use that learning in my either program development or my evaluation development as well? Needs assessment as well. You'll want to do that before you think about conceptualizing your program. I'll get into these in detail as well. But there's also logic models, which kind of captures that project development and implementation and process evaluation as well, kind of capturing that implementation of your project. So literature review. This scans the relevant documents regarding a specific topic. So as I said earlier, it's good to do this prior to thinking about creating an evaluation plan or thinking about developing a program, because you want to be able to see what is out there. So I outlined some steps here. I know it's pretty straightforward, but just as a refresher, you want to select your topic. You want to ensure that something can be searched. It's not too general or too vague. Then you want to go select some keywords that really capture what you're trying to get at with your literature search. And a good strategy here is to look at what other people used and look at the keywords that are attached to each article, and then kind of fleshing that out and perhaps expanding your search based upon that. You also want to ensure that you're looking at not just, research articles, but also the gray literature too, because there's a lot of fantastic information out there that isn't necessarily published in an academic journal, right? The one caution with that, though, is that you do have to be careful that it's not vetted in the same way that a research article would be vetted. So it's not going to have peer reviewers necessarily, right? So just a bit of a caution when looking at the gray literature, but do use it wisely. And one way to do that is to assess the article quality. So if you're looking at both academic and non-academic articles, you really want to ensure that the article quality is there, right? If you're noticing a few inconsistencies, you may not want to use that article in your analysis because it may not be actually reflective of what's being studied. And then once you have all of that, you want to write a synthesis of the literature, of the findings of literature, and then create a report. One thing I will say too, if you're having trouble accessing articles, you can often just contact the author and they'll be more than happy to share the article with you. So if you see, oftentimes in the articles, they will have the contact information of folks. So just shoot them an email and see if they're able to give you the article, because I know there's licensing issues that come up, right? So, and even checking things like Google Scholar, ResearchGate, you can actually directly contact folks that way. So it could be a good strategy to get articles that are kind of tricky to get. So the next type of evaluation is a needs assessment. So assessing the needs of your community, it helps determine gaps in your community as well. So to do this, you really want to have a focus topic again. So ensuring that you're not going to get this really overwhelming kind of sense of data of what your community needs. And to build that evidence, once you have your topic, you'll be conducting a literature review, but also doing some surveys and interviews with folks in your community to really get the full picture of what the needs are in your community. And once again, important to report the findings. Logic models. So logic models are a fantastic resource for any program to have. They provide a visual representation of how your program or service operates and the goal it intends to achieve. So it's just like usually a one-page, optimally a one-page kind of snapshot of your program that you can take around to funders, to other programs, to consumers of your services, just to really provide people with that snapshot of what your program offers. So how to do that? A review of program and service documentation. It's really an iterative process. You're going to have several consultations with key program players, kind of revising the logic model as you go forward, and then creating the logic model and verifying it with the key program players as well. And the last type of formative evaluation that I'll speak about is implementation and process evaluations. So these determine if program services are being delivered as planned and reviews program operations as well. So once again, you'll be doing a lot of one-on-one or some group work with folks directly involved with the program, including staff, senior level managers, as well as consumers of the program as well, and looking at administrative data too, so what records are being kept. So you can really get a really fulsome picture of what your, of how your program is being implemented. because it's really important. You want to see if there's any challenges that emerge which may, explain some of the outcomes that you're getting. Perhaps it's there needs to be a strengthened area of your program or model that may be indicative of, the gaps you may be experiencing in your outcomes. So now to switch to summative evaluation, which I mentioned earlier is the impact of an intervention on the target group. What most people think about when they hear the word evaluation. So there's outcome evaluation, impact evaluation, and economic evaluation as well. So with an outcome evaluation, it measures the short-term and medium-term changes that result from participating in a program or service. How to do it? You select your evaluation objective. What are those key indicators? Or what are those key questions that you really want to answer? Select your methodology. It could be a mix of different things. So thinking about quantitative methods, qualitative methods, mixed methods. I'm a big proponent of mixed methods because they're able to really capture the program in a way that's, both numerical as well as a verbal. You get those oral stories as well from folks, which really tell the story, and they contextualize quantitative results. And the quantitative results can also contextualize the qualitative results, right? So there's that symbiotic relationship. You can think about doing a longitudinal study, so tracking folks over time, or a cross-sectional study where you just kind of look at folks at the one time point. You're not going to get as much data, but it could be good just to get a snapshot of how your program is doing in terms of outcomes. And then obviously you'll want to collect that data using surveys, interviews, focus groups, those kind of things, analyze the data and report the findings as well. So something that's a big push, right? We want to all know how our programs are doing. So impact evaluation, this measures community level change that has resulted from the program, more the long-term results. So it's the same kind of methodology, but framed at the community level as opposed to the program level. So thinking about, public health approaches to evaluation, how do they do that? How do they integrate that more higher level outcomes discussion in their work? So it's super important work that doesn't necessarily always get done. We really try to look at the immediate impacts of a program, but I think it's important too to consider what the impact of the evaluation is as well at the broader level. And the last two I threw up here, these aren't my specialty, but they're super important, right? Costing is just a huge consideration in any program. So there's two main types. You have a cost effectiveness analysis, which identifies and provides information on the full costs of a program and relates those costs to specific measures of program outcomes. So how to do it? You develop a measure that serves as a proxy for program success, so something like the number of individuals housed, let's say, and determine if the program's success outcomes are worth the dollar cost. So it's a bit of a different process, but it's really understanding if the expenditure really matches what outcomes you are achieving. And the second type is a cost-benefit analysis. So this identifies and provides information on the full costs of programs and further weighs those costs against the dollar value of all program benefits. So how do you do that? You determine the benefits of a program and place a dollar value on those benefits. And then you calculate the total cost of the program, and then you compare those two things. So you compare the benefits and the cost and see the difference that emerges. So these are really important. I think they're really valuable to really kind of frame your program and sell your program as well. And there are really detailed methodologies out there that you can follow. And I won't even try in the time allotted to explain those. So I wanted just to provide just as a refresher for folks on what evaluation can be, what evaluation is, and just some of those, defining those concepts, because as we can see, we're trying to get from a sea of jargon to a beach of clarity. We know that research and evaluation can, can be confusing. There's so many terms thrown out there. So the first part of my presentation was to really just kind of conceptualize a lot of those terms, those methods, and provide the groundwork for how to build evaluation capacity within the sector. And here I just outlined some steps to evaluation. I've kind of touched upon each of these as I described some of the evaluation topics, so I won't focus too much on them right here, but this could be a reference going forward if you kind of want to think about developing evaluation methods and evaluation questions within your agency, within wherever you may work or whatever you may participate in. So I'm going to talk about evaluation capacity building. Now, this is a term. It is something that has received a lot of attention in the evaluation field. And it's super important, right? Because you don't want to have the small group of folks who are just the ones in charge of evaluation. You want to ensure that evaluation practices are able to flow across your agency or across your program. So I'm taking this from a study from Preskel and Boyle in 2008, and just to define the concept. So evaluation capacity building, or ECB, involves the design and implementation of teaching and learning strategies to help individuals, groups, and organizations learn about what constitutes effective, useful, and professional evaluation practice. So the ultimate goal of ECB is sustainable evaluation practice, where members continuously ask questions that matter, collect, analyze, and interpret data, and use evaluation findings for decision-making and action. So how do you sustain these evaluation practices? Staff must be provided with leadership support, incentives, resources, and opportunities to transfer their learning about evaluation to their everyday work. Sustainable practices also require the development of systems, processes, policies, and plans that help embed evaluation work into the way the organization accomplishes its mission and strategic goals. So it's really that embedding process of putting evaluation at the forefront of your agency's activities. So here's a kind of large figure that Preskel and Boyle offer within the article that I'm referencing. You can see there's a lot of components, right? So you have on the left and the right, they both kind of feed into one another, right? And in the middle, you have different strategies or things to consider as you develop this organizational evaluation capacity. On the right, you can see what the end result of evaluation capacity building, what it results in. So you have evaluation policies and procedures, evaluation frameworks and processes, resources dedicated to evaluation, continuous learning about evaluation, strategic plan for evaluation, integrated knowledge management and evaluation systems, shared evaluation beliefs and commitments, and use of evaluation findings. So these are kind of what evaluation capacity building practice in your organization, what it may result in, right? So how do you really develop this evaluation capacity building? It sounds great in theory, but it's really important to take necessary steps to really think about, evaluation may not be something really that is strong in my organizations. How do we build that strength, right? So here are some strategies outlined by Preskel and Boyle. Perhaps having staff take an internship at another agency, so which takes place in a formal setting. Written materials are really important as well, right? So looking at, there's a lot of great web resources out there. If you go to the Canadian Evaluation Society website, they have some fantastic materials that are often free of cost. Technology too, right? I just referenced the CES website. There's other websites out there too that really have a strong evaluation materials that you can use. Meetings, so having a place for evaluation activities and learnings to be brought forward within your agency. So dedicating time to having an evaluation sit down with folks, right? I think that's super important to actually dedicate the time to discuss these things. And appreciative inquiry, so using an assets-based collaborative narrative approach to learning about evaluation that focuses on strengths within the organization. So how do you really build upon those evaluation activities that are currently occurring, or how can you build upon people's strengths to really develop evaluation capacity within your organization? Because we know our team members will bring a lot of strengths with them, right? So how do you really capitalize on that? They list 10, so here are the remaining ones. The communities of practice, so sharing with informal or informal networks of shared interests. So perhaps if you're within a housing agency, linking up with other housing agencies who have similar kind of are thriving to develop their evaluation capacity within their organization as well. Perhaps there's a strong agency, or not strong, but perhaps there's an agency that has a large evaluation component to their work. How are you able to get them on board and, maybe have a monthly meeting with folks to discuss how do we strengthen our current evaluation? What best practices can we learn from other folks in the room? It's a great opportunity to troubleshoot as well. And training, obviously, I think this should have come earlier, but training is super important because there are a lot of opportunities out there, extending from workshops to classes. And there's a great online reference called YouthRex, where they actually offer an online program in-program evaluation. So at the end, you do get a certificate. So if you want to check that website out, I think they offer them twice a year. So it's all online. You can do it outside of work. So it's not taking away from your job. And you kind of get a nice sense of what evaluation is, some tools on how to do it. So I would recommend, because training is so important with evaluation, right? You really want to learn the basics, and something like YouthRex would offer that. Being involved in, once you kind of have that training, getting involved in an evaluation process is super important. So how are you able to take that theory into practice? So thinking about designing and implementing an evaluation with others, or working under a more senior level researcher or evaluator at your agency, just being able to actually put that theory into practice is so important, because you'll learn just so much in doing what you receive training on. Technical assistance as well. This could come from either within the agency or outside of the agency. So if you're really, if you want to, maybe you're troubleshooting on something, or you want to develop more skills in one area, ask someone within your agency, or you could also ask someone outside of your agency too. A lot of folks are just happy to share their knowledge and their learnings, right? So it could be a great opportunity to really make new connections to within the community where your agency may be situated. And lastly, coaching and mentoring too. This is super important. So building a relationship with an evaluation, they say expert, but someone just involved who has experience with evaluation, who you can go to if you have those questions. So these are pretty straightforward, but I think you can build on these, right? I think agencies out there can really think about, evaluation capacity building sounds daunting, but these 10 principles outlined here, I think they're more tangible, right? So you don't have to do all 10 necessarily, but think about just gradually introducing these things. And just to provide like a real world example, so this is coming from a not-for-profit, the article from Garcia, and they were able to talk about evaluation capacity building, and they went through that process and just some of the lessons learned that they found. So one of them is consider working with one staff member within organizations when lacking the economic and human resources to engage in more traditional ECB efforts. So as I said previously, there's a lot that has to be done for evaluation capacity building to occur. So think about dedicating one or two staff members within your organization, making them that evaluation champion within your agency. It's super important to really have that champion to really kind of push the message of evaluation and be that beacon of knowledge for folks if they have questions on evaluation as well. Another second point, given the importance of the organizational infrastructure for the development of evaluation capacity, the evaluation champion should be in a leadership position, be willing to be a catalyst for ECB in their organization, and be committed to the organization and to diffusing evaluation capacity within the organization. So being able to actually hash out some time to do these things for your evaluation champion or champions is super important as well. And examine the impact of capacity building processes on the growth and professional development of the staff serving in the role of catalyst for change. So to what degree does acquiring evaluation skills facilitate the promotion of staff within and outside the organization? So kind of what are the tangible outcomes from having that evaluation champion in your agency is something important to consider. Perhaps if there's not a lot going on, perhaps you need someone else or add people to that champion role to really provide support for folks as well. And just one last thing before Steph takes over. One question I get oftentimes is what is the difference or the pros and cons of internal and external evaluation? So internal, that evaluation happening within your own agency compared to an external evaluator like myself who comes in and does the evaluation work. So there's pros and cons to each, right? So I'll just outline a few here because I think that it's a big question for folks because I know budgets are tight and it's something to really something to consider. So there's a few things to consider. Cost. Internal evaluations will generally cost less than an external evaluation, but the optimal use of an external evaluator may be less costly in the long run. Availability. So since internal evaluators are located directly within the agency, they may be more readily available than external evaluators. However, this may not always be the case as the other demands of the internal evaluator may take precedence. Just their knowledge of the program, right? An internal evaluator has the advantage given that they are immersed in the program. It may take more time for external evaluators to acquire this knowledge. A couple other things to consider: specialist skills and expertise. External evaluators will potentially bring specialized skills and evaluation capacity. This could be around evaluation methodology or knowledge on a specific topic. However, internal evaluators may also possess these skills and have experiences delivering more applied evaluations than external evaluators do. And the last one, perceived objectivity. So an external evaluator will be viewed as being unbiased and objective. An internal evaluator will understandably have a stake in the evaluation results. It's important to recognize that there is perceived objectivity of external evaluators, since external evaluators will inevitably have their own biases they bring to the evaluation themselves, and that internal evaluators may have checks and balances to balance their own biases. So just some things to consider too when you're thinking about evaluation capacity building and that internal versus external divide. There's pros and cons to each, but just don't be afraid to really think about how you can achieve internal evaluation capacity building as well. So that's it for me. I'll take it over to Steph.
Great, thank you so much, John, for that presentation. So I'm going to now go over what you do once you've developed an evaluation plan or you've finalized an evaluation, how you would then communicate those findings to an audience. It could be to your funder, it could be to the general public, through the media, it could be to policymakers, so a wide variety of audiences. Just to give you an intro about myself, I'm Steph. I'm the Director of Communications here at the COH. I oversee all the design and communications work that comes out of our organization. And just a little overview of my part of the presentation. I'll go over what a communication strategy entails, using an example of a report that we released last fall as a kind of a guide to show you how it works in practice. And then I'll end with some templates and tips and tricks that we've used in the past, and they're all free for you to use as well. Yeah, so we'll have some links at the end to give you, and then we'll, I think, end with a Q&A. So first we need to understand what communications is. Essentially, it's a two-way process. So the better you listen to and know your audience, the better they will relate to your needs and the more your message will be listened to. Well, it's really important that you're listening to your audience and not just communicating your organization's mission. You need to make sure that you're also getting feedback from your audience constantly to make sure you're communicating the info that they need. And you must also consider that the tools and channels must fit the message and the audience. So the way that you communicate to your funder would be different than you would communicate, say, to the general public. There's just something to keep in mind. And then, of course, there's no one-size-fits-all approach. So what I'm going to show you next really was tailored to the specific report. But I mean, we learned from that process since, and there's many different ways we could have done it. So don't feel like, you can only do it this way or you have to do all of these steps. There's certainly ways you can do a simpler plan or a more elaborate plan, depending on what you're producing and what you're releasing. So what is a communication strategy? So essentially it's like a plan to communicate information to an audience for a specific reason. So again, maybe going back to John's example, maybe you have this really great evaluation report that you've finalized. How do you then think about releasing it to your funder? How do you share that information with your funder? And what steps will you take? So that's what a communication strategy is. And these are the key elements of a strategy. And if you can picture that each one of these bullet points is, say, a heading in a Word document, what my team does is we share a Google Doc between us. As a communications team, we share that with the research team. And together as a team, we we work together to fill in these blanks. So what are the goals and objectives of a certain document? What do we want our audience to know? Who is the audience? This is something that's really important as we're working together. Often the communications team gets the final report at the end of the process. So we're not quite sure how the final findings came about or what the research is about. So it's really important that we have a communication strategy document that the research team can overview to make sure that the key messaging and the tools that we're using to communicate the results are what they intended. So I'll go through each one of these bullet points in the next slides, and with an example of how we did it with a report that we released. And that report was the Housing First for Youth program model guide from this past fall. So essentially we wanted to know from the researchers, what is this report about? Give us an overview, give us maybe 2 paragraphs of information about this report that we can then use on our social media messaging, we can share in our newsletter, we can share as part of a press release to media, for example. And then we wanted to know from them, what are the goals and objectives of this report? What do you want to happen once we release this report? So their main goal was to look at the big picture. We wanted to raise awareness about the issue of youth homelessness and that Housing First can work for youth. So that was their goal. They wanted their audience to know that, and the audience was quite broad. And what are the intended outcomes? That was one of the objectives, was to essentially engage the public and policymakers in order to help fund and create Housing First for Youth programs. So again, generating awareness, what is Housing First for Youth? And a key point that the researchers wanted us to share was that it's a model that's both effective and achievable. So they really wanted us to make that clear in all of our messaging. And the second goal was to engage key stakeholders, so MPs and policymakers especially. We wanted them to know what Housing First for Youth is. And we had quite a vast list of audience members. When we broke up our audience, we needed to know who the audience was. So as I mentioned earlier, one of the main audiences was policymakers, but a secondary audience might have been frontline workers. So we really wanted to make sure that the messaging for each was different and that it was tailored to what they already know about Housing First for Youth or what maybe they don't know. So we really had to make sure it was clear that the audience that we were targeting had the information that they needed. So we really had to think about how these audiences get information. So we had to consider personal preferences and habits. We know sometimes people working in this sector don't always have access to social media during the day. It's often blocked for several organizations. So that meant if we're posting all of our messaging on Facebook and Twitter, our audience in that level wasn't going to get information from us. So we needed to make sure that we shared the information on a variety of formats and channels. We couldn't rely solely on social media. So that meant having to send out emails to organizations, putting together a press release, really ensuring that our information was out there in a wide variety of formats as possible. We also had to consider the level of understanding of the issue. So we use the acronym Housing First for Youth, HF4V, or for Y. And so we wanted to make sure that that was always defined. We couldn't just rely on that acronym because nobody would know what that meant as a standalone acronym. We had to define what that meant whenever we used it. We also had to consider people new to the sector wouldn't know what Housing First in general was. So we had to make sure to explain that clearly as well. So all these things had to be considered for our audience in general, and just understanding that our audience might be really new to the topic or they might be really well versed in it. But either way, we wanted to make sure that they had all the information in front of them and were able to receive it no matter what channel we sent it through. So here's just actually many examples of channels that you can use to share research report findings or any kind of communication that you'd like to make. So everything from public engagement events to pitching to the media, social media outreach, sending letters to stakeholders. Something we've done in the past is to send mass letters to MPs just to let them know about a new report. And producing things like flyers, having information up on our website, all of these different channels were used. And so for this particular Housing First for Youth document, we did several things. We had information up on our websites, we had social media content, we drafted a press release, we wrote a blog post, we had sent out a newsletter to our mailing list, we sent letters to various stakeholders, and we even created infographics to kind of distill the information that was found in the report. And again, this is key to have as many different possible tools and channels available to you, and do as much as you possibly can to get that information out there, not rely on just producing a blog post and hoping that that's enough to get your information out there. Here's just some examples of some of the design work that we did. So on the left, we had a social media image to promote the report. And in the center, we had an infographic that highlights the key points of the report. Those key messages that our authors wanted us to share is all distilled on this infographic. It's about a 2-page infographic. And on the right is the cover of the report. So it all tied in together. What we understand at COH now, after doing this type of work for several years, is that people may be happy with just receiving the infographic and getting all the information they need from that. And if they want to know more, at the bottom, we always link to the main report, the main research, so that people can go in and dig deeper if they want more information. Or if not that, then they might just read the blog post and that's enough information for them. So again, having a variety of content available will help reach a larger audience. And then it's important to think about the key messaging. So thinking back to that Google Doc or Word doc with the bullet points, we would have maybe half a page or a page of bullet points of what does the reader really need to know? What do the authors want us to communicate in all of our messaging? So we would have a list. It could have been 5 to 10 various bullet points of, that the authors suggested that we include in all of our messaging. So here's just the start of what we had here. And of course we would take this content and maybe make a tweet out of it, or we might write a blog post using some of this content. So it's just really helpful to have a communication strategy document that you can work off of and that your whole team can refer to make sure messaging is always consistent across all those various items, whether the infographic or the press release, all the messaging is consistent. And then you have to think about how to reach these audiences. Like I mentioned before, we found that some might not have access to social media during the day. So if our audience is only being targeted by using social media, we might not reach them. So we need to consider, okay, maybe we also need to target a blog post at them. We need to send a newsletter. So we always make sure that each audience has one or two or three tactics that will target directly to them to make sure that they're more likely to see the content. And then if we found, for example, that a blog post wasn't going to be enough, then we would go back and consider, okay, how else can we reach a key stakeholder group? So it could be sending them an email directly to let them know that a report has been released. So it's really important to consider you're not just using one platform to communicate with your audience. And here's what we did for this particular report to ensure that it reached a wide audience. So again, we had this report up on our websites. We were sharing content via social media. We had a press release. We published a newsletter, infographic, and blog post. We sent personalized letters, and then we had a webinar like this one to let our stakeholders ask questions and to fill them in on the main goals and messaging of the report itself. And this was our timeline for how we would do all of this work. So we had set a launch date, so some date in November, where the report would be available. It would be available in a variety of places. So the press release would have been available that day, a blog post, and newsletter. We might have shared the report itself with key stakeholders a day before just to give them a heads up and just as a courtesy. And then we held the webinar a week later to give people that amount of time to read the report and really dive in to be able to ask us questions following that. So this is kind of it's a great tool to implement in your communication strategy, just to give everyone a sense of when all of these items you've created are going to come out, so people aren't expecting all the tweets in one day. You can kind of give a good sense as to when each item will be released. And of course, at the end, evaluation is very important. What worked and what didn't work. So maybe we sent the press release and didn't get any media coverage. So what can we do differently next time? So that could mean maybe contacting the media a couple of days prior to the release just to let them know it's coming and see who's interested. Considering other ways that we could reach media if that was our main audience. maybe sending out tweets to key members in media or key media outlets that we'd want to reach. So there's a variety of things that we could do differently every single time, and every time we release something that worked, using a strategy that worked the previous time might not work the next time. So we need to consider multiple different angles each time, and be willing to be flexible to find ways to communicate with our audience, and see it might not always, realize it might not always work the way we intended. And then just as you're preparing, say, a blog post or a press release, these are just some key points to consider. So making sure that you have the information in the right order, having, in a press release, for example, in a blog post, you really want the summary of the report to be right up front. What was the main finding, or what's the most important message from this report? You want that to be right at the top. And then considering what follows. You, again, really want your information to be very clear and using plain language. Plain language is key to all of the work that we do here at the COH. I like this next slide because it Dorothy just wants to go home. So you need to keep in mind your average user's level of expertise in your area. Again, using acronyms might work if you're talking to your coworkers, but if you're talking to a broad audience, you really need to define those acronyms to make sure that everyone's clear as to what you're referring to. And you also want to write to everyone who'd be interested in your topic, not just experts, but even an expert would prefer a clearly written document that they can read quickly and efficiently. And titles also matter. So thinking about a press release or a blog post, this was a title that we had suggested. The first one was a title we had suggested for a press release we had released on mental health care for homeless youth. We realized after speaking with several people on staff, we could really simplify this title to just the government strategy on youth homelessness must focus on mental health needs. Like, that was the key point of this report. That's really what we should be saying, and not making it any longer than it needs to be. So really thinking about language and plain language especially, and keeping things simple for titles especially will help grab your audience's attention. And also thinking about the hook of your report. So this is an example of a report we released back in 2014 on the state of homelessness in Canada. Our main goal with this one was to grab the media's attention. So working with economists, we found that for a $2 investment per Canadian annually, per week, we could end homelessness. So this was something that we ran with. We had social media images that equated, if you were to give up a bottle of pop, that's exactly the same thing as this investment. So just something to your audience in and get them interested in the information helps, and then hopefully they read your report and get further acquainted with what your message is. And of course, just a reminder to be patient. Sometimes we release things like policy briefs or documents with really great recommendations, and sometimes it takes weeks or years or maybe even just months to see any real change from your work. But it's important to remember to be patient, and the results will come. So now I'll leave you with some templates, and I'm thinking after we'll be able to share this PowerPoint template with you, so you'll have our slides and content and these links as well. But if not, you're welcome to email John or I after the presentation, and we'll send you these documents as well. Some more examples. So we often get asked about our social media images and how we're possibly able to create so much content. And great thing is there's lots of tools out there that help us do this. So a tool like Canva.com will allow you to create, will actually allow you to choose a background image and add text to it that you can simply just put together in a couple of minutes and throw on social media. So if you don't have a graphic designer, this is a really great tool to keep in your pocket. Also for icons, so we create a lot of infographics, and we might use a website like the Noun Project, where you can download free icons that you can insert into your work. And there's also things like infographic templates. So easily.com is a great example. You can fill in the images and the text as you see fit. Another example is PictoChart that does a very similar thing with infographic templates. And there's lots of really great designs you can pick from to customize. And then here's just a lengthy list of more tools that might be of help to you if you're looking to do design work at your organization or agency. And that's it on my front. I guess we can open it up to questions at this point.
Yeah, thanks, Steph, and thank you, John, as well. So I'd like to open the floor to any comments and questions. We have a dialog box. It should be in your little GoToWebinar control panel. It's a question dialog box. So if you do have any questions, please type them in there, and I will read them out loud to John and Steph. I'll get us started, if that's okay. I have a question for you, Steph.
Sure.
So acknowledging that there are many mediums that you presented them that can be used to communicate and share an organization's information, whether it's an evaluation or something about a program or whatever it is based on a communication strategy.
Yep.
For organizations with stretched capacity, are there one or two or three, best mediums or best strategies to communicate an organization's messages that you can suggest?
Yeah, so a really simple way, I guess, depending if your audience is quite broad, a really great way would be getting a close contact in the media, especially if you're in a smaller community. You can even do something like phone up the social justice reporter or housing reporter at your local paper and offer to have coffee with them just to give them more information about your organization and the kind of work that you're doing. Because establishing that contact will give you that reference point later on when you can just quickly, call them up or send them a quick blurb about what you're releasing, and then they'll do all the work of writing up the newspaper article or whatever it is that they're producing to share your information to a really broad audience. So that's one really great way. Other ways are contacting partner organizations that might be able to communicate your message on their behalf. So if you know another organization that has a really large mailing list, subscriber list, then maybe contacting them to ask if they could share the results for you. So there's just some ways around doing these kinds of things without having to do it yourself. Maybe maybe your organization doesn't have a blog, but maybe a partner organization does that you could quickly write up a blog post for. So it's just really sharing that information with your partners and getting help sometimes to do that kind of work if you don't have the capacity to do it in-house.
Yeah, collaboration is always good.
Collaboration is key, yeah.
So no questions yet, but I do have a question for John as well. And John, I've taken you off mute, so you can definitely answer now. And this might be for both of you because John had mentioned hub solutions at the very beginning, and you kind of went into a little bit of detail there. But I was hoping that hub solution sounds like something that might be of interest to some stakeholders out there and to some of these groups on call today. I'm specifically interested in personally in the fee for service, the research, evaluation, and design work for communities and programs that would like enhanced supports. But just about if you want to go into just a little bit more detail about hub solutions and what it can offer to organizations out there.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll start off, Steph, and then you can fill in any gaps because I'm sure there will be some. So yeah, Hub Solutions we launched in 2016. Then that's kind of why I came on to the COH actually, was to help out. The COH was getting a lot of requests for evaluation support. So they created this position, the Director of Research and Evaluation, which I was fortunate to fill. Just to really provide some supports out there to communities. So I'm happy to field any questions that people may have about research and evaluation activities. If it goes to a place where, maybe a more intensive kind of consultation is required, or if people want us to go out and do the evaluation itself, then that's where the fee-for-service model will come up. So yeah, as part of that process, we'll work collaboratively with you, develop an evaluation plan, some timelines, some work plans to really ensure that we're capturing what folks are looking for out of an evaluation, right? And really bringing our expertise and content knowledge on homelessness and housing issues to the table. So we in our evaluation projects thus far, we've really tried to engage in the collaborative process. So we've had a lot of stakeholder engagement using kind of a lot of interesting methods, trying to include people with lived experience as much as possible as well. So yeah, just really trying to create a fulsome a picture of people's programs and developing an end product where Steph kind of takes and her team takes over and really thinks of it as more of a knowledge dissemination tool instead of a report. So as you can see, there's a lot of work that goes involved with this, hence where the fee for service component comes in. But we're also happy to, like write some blogs afterwards, feature them on our website, and really try to promote our projects as well to ensure that stakeholders are, really getting a lot of acknowledgement for the great work that they're doing. I'll let Steph take over.
Yeah. That's exactly it. And from the design and communications perspective, so we're here to, provide guidance. So if you're starting out with a communication strategy and you're not sure what to include, then we're happy to provide guidance on that work, and even to share tools. So if you're creating an infographic, maybe you wanted to know about additional tools that might help you, we're happy to share all the tools that we have and know of and provide feedback on your designs or whatever it is you might need. And that's just something we're trying to do to increase capacity within the sector so that you can do this kind of work yourself. But then, of course, if you needed something like a report laid out, then that's something where the fee for service would come in. So it's really just trying to provide a balance. And the great part about Hub Solutions is that the fees would actually then go back into our own research work so that we're able to do more research and provide more tools for the sector to use.
Fantastic. And so if people have more questions on Hub Solutions, they can just email either of you, or is it better to email one or the other?
Either or both. We can, depending on whether it's evaluation or design related, you can just send an email and we'll get back to you either way.
Fantastic. So we have a comment coming in. It's not a question, but it is a comment coming in from I'm sorry if I pronounce your name wrong, but Olusola from Oakville, Ontario. And Olusola says that it's a comment in regards to the communication strategy presentation. So the infographics and icons are really good tools to use in communities where illiteracy is high, homeless communities where the homeless are uneducated but can interpret and understand graphics or icons was what they're referring to.
That's a great
These tools
point.
can be used to explain the homeless situation in such communities or among such groups. So that was a comment coming from Olusola.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Fantastic.
Yeah, that's great.
So that's no other questions are coming in. We have a quiet audience today, but they do have your emails now. So if they do have any further, or if anyone has further questions, I'm sure John or Steph or both of them would be happy to answer. Fantastic. Do you have any last comments before I do my little conclusion?
No, well, thank you so much for having us. This is really great. I'm glad we can share this info with a larger group.
For sure. And I did have one little question. Who's coming? It's a question that's coming in from someone that I went to school with. Hello, Gaju. So Gaju's just asking, will all the slides be shared with attendees? And they will. John and Steph agreed to share the presentation, and we'll also be posting the actual webinar. It should be posted, a recording of the webinar. Both of those will be posted hopefully by the end of this week on our website, and then John and Steph will also be sharing it through Homeless Hub, their website. Okay, so that's all the time we have for today's webinar. Many thanks from all of us here at CHRA to John and Steph. Thank you for taking the time to present this interesting and important work that you're doing. And then also thank you to all of our audience for participating. CHRA's next webinar is scheduled for March 29th, when we'll be joined by Judy Walsh from Nanaimo Affordable Housing Society and Tara Ramkalawin from Food Share Toronto to talk about food security and social housing. So check out the CHRA website at chra-achru.ca/programs for more information. That website will be included in the emails that you receive after this webinar today. And also don't forget to register for CHRA's 50th Annual Congress taking place in Ottawa, Ontario on April 24th through to April 27th. And more information can also be found on the CHRA's website. Today, like I said, today's presentation will be made available on the CHRA website in the next few days, so check back soon. And just one last comment coming in from someone. Thanks for the great presentation.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And everyone enjoy the rest of your Wednesday.
Yeah, thanks.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.